Hello and welcome to this edition of Weapons and Warfare. For Straight Arrow News, I'm your host, Ryan Robertson, and we are coming to you from National Harbor, Maryland, site of this year's Air and Space Forces Association's Air, Space, and Cyber Conference. Just ahead on this episode, 6 months after announcing some generational changes for the Air Force, we get a progress report from the Secretary of the Air Force, Frank Kendall, and Air Force Chief of Staff, General David Alvin. And we're getting an up-close look at two of the competitors competing for the right to wear the crown of the Collaborative Combat Aircraft. That's our weapon of the week. But first, some headlines you may have missed. Should the Chinese continue to amp up tensions in the South China Sea by taking a rusted relic of World War II, the U.S. would likely intervene. That's according to Philippine Secretary of National Defense Gilberto Teodoro, who told CBS's 60 Minutes if China were to take the Sierra Madre, that it would be a clear act of war on a Philippine vessel. In May, Teodoro stood with the Secretaries of Defense from Japan, Australia, and the U.S. as they outlined a mutual alignment across the Indo-Pacific to strengthen regional peace and security.
First and foremost, we're here today because we share a common vision, and that vision is a free and open Indo-Pacific. And we believe that our continued work together will continue to promote activities that will help lead to that accomplishment of that vision.
The Sierra Madre, a World War II-era ship that serves as a base for a small garrison of Philippine Marines, was intentionally grounded by the Philippines on the Second Thomas Shoal to serve as a marker for Philippine maritime territory. In recent months, it's been the site of increased aggression and provocation by the Chinese, who falsely claim the territory as their own. For the first time, the Air Force has released video of an airborne B21 Raider. While amateur videographers have captured the Raider in flight, this marks the first time the Air Force has given the green light to video of a takeoff and landing at Edwards Air Force Base in California. At the same time, Northrop Grumman's president of aeronautics, Tom Jones, told attendees of a panel at Airspace and Cyber that the next-gen long-distance bomber is flying as often as twice a week. The hope is the Raider will be a daily flyer, unlike the B-2 Spirit, which traditionally has required significant maintenance after each sortie. If testing continues to progress as expected, the Air Force says the B-21 will be operational sometime in the mid-2020s. Talk about being a good neighbor. The U.S. Army recently helped a Canadian politician jump out of a perfectly good aircraft. This was the scene high above an air show near London, Ontario in Canada, as the local mayor, Josh Morgan, went for a tandem jump with the renowned U.S. Army parachute team, the Golden Knights. The leap of faith was part of the 100th anniversary celebration for the Royal Canadian Air Force, highlighting the collaborative spirit between Canadian and U.S. military units. Of the jump, the Army said it symbolized the bond and shared history of military aviation between the two nations. It was just 6 months ago, on a very similar stage in Aurora, Colorado, when the Secretary of the Air Force and the Air Force Chief of Staff announced a series of service-wide changes in the face of evolving threats and the changing nature of warfare. Half a year later, Frank Kendall and General David Alvin are front and center once again, meeting with the troops, but this time to deliver a progress report on the changes being made.
China, China, China. I didn't want to disappoint you.
No one can ever accuse Frank Kendall of not playing the hits. And even though the 26th Secretary of the Air Force kicked off this year's Air, Space, and Cyber Conference with a moment of levity, he remained as on message as ever during his keynote address to scores of airmen and guardians.
The threat from China is increasing. I've instructed our briefers to stop referring to the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Liberation Army as a future or emerging or potential threat. I've been closely watching the evolution of its military for 15 years. China is not a future threat. China is a threat today.
That threat, along with Russia's continued aggression against Ukraine, as well as prolonged unrest in the Middle East, helped spur a series of service-wide changes for the Air and Space Forces that were announced in early 2024.
The short version of our progress on the 24 decisions that we announced is that all the actions required are well underway. A few are slightly behind their original schedule, but overall progress is excellent, and nothing is far enough off track to cause major concern.
Despite that optimistic outlook, concerns do remain, notably with Congress. Between bureaucratic gridlock and an ever-increasing emphasis on cost-saving practices, Kendall says he remains committed to moving the ball forward through communication.
My overall guidance is that we need to move at the speed of leadership, not the speed of bureaucracy. What that means in practice is that any concerns or issues are elevated quickly to the senior leaders so they can be resolved. To be blunt, we don't have the time for petty parochial interests or arguments about turf.
For the Air Force's top boss in uniform, General David Alvin, that time is as much a resource as funding and manpower. Speaking after Secretary Kendall, the Air Force Chief of Staff said much has been done in the last 6 months, but there is still distance yet to be covered.
This is not academic. We just finalized the command selection list. So in summer of 2025, you will have 60 of your wings or 40% of the United States Air Force, which will be under this construct. And we will continue to move down that ramp because we're moving forward on that. This is not an intellectual exercise. We're moving out.
Also among the general's points of emphasis is the provisional stand-up of the Integrated Capabilities Command, which will oversee the largest restructuring of the Air Force since the start of the Cold War nearly 80 years ago.
Because this is something we absolutely have to get right, but we know we have to get right fast. And so putting those together to make sure the operators from all of the different functional areas are coming together, imagining the future. And number one for Integrated Capabilities Command, we have to remain competitive into the future.
A future that Alvin says has to reflect an Air Force that's right for its place in time and history. An Air Force that has changed because the threats have changed.
There will be challenges ahead. There will be dark skies ahead. There will be trouble ahead. And if we don't plan for how we're going to navigate through that, the storm will come upon us and we won't be prepared. In this, our time of consequence, it is up to us to have the courage, the boldness to take these actions. And I believe that these actions will result in what our airmen need, which is one Air Force, and what the Joint Force demands, which is one Air Force, what the nation demands, which is one Air Force, to meet the challenge and ensure we can continue to fly, fight, and win, and deliver air power anytime, anywhere. Thank you.
Serving you clarity through context, our mission at SAN is to deliver the news straight down the middle. We're different from mainstream media because we spotlight distorted headlines and show you how to do it too. Discover stories that right and left-leaning outlets are choosing not to cover by using our Media Miss tool. Download the SAN app and turn on notifications to have straight facts delivered right to your phone or tablet, and get straight facts anytime at SAN.com.
A little more than 2 years ago, Secretary of the Air Force Frank Kendall announced plans for the Air Force to build a fleet of autonomous drones that would fly into combat alongside crewed platforms. Called the Collaborative Combat Aircraft, 5 companies were selected for the initial round of competition for the contract: Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, General Atomics, and Anduril. In April, that number was whittled down to just 2, General Atomics and Anduril. And at the AFA's Airspace Cyber 2024 conference, we got our first up-close look at the finalists, which is why the CCA is our weapon of the week.
Collaborative combat aircraft represent a lot of changes for U.S. air power, but at their core, these are still planes.
But I can tell you that it would operate just like a fighter. So it has landing gear, it would roll out from a hangar, it would take off, it would climb and cruise ahead of or alongside a traditional combat fighter formation. And in that way, it would look very familiar, with the big difference that there's nobody on board.
Phil Ewing is the spokesperson for General Atomics, one of 2 companies chosen in the DoD's first tranche to field working CCA prototypes. The other is Anduril with its Fury. We spoke to Anduril previously about Fury, but the company declined to do an on-air interview during ASC 2024. We do, however, know it will operate on largely the same principles as General Atomics' CCA. It will be fast and maneuverable. It's designed with modularity in mind so it can accomplish multiple missions, and above all, it will be attritable.
One way to think about it is, if you want to start a fire, you can strike a match and throw it away. You can buy a Zippo lighter made out of brass, and it'll last the rest of your life. And what General Atomics has said is that we want these to be BIC lighters. So, very durable product. Everyone knows how to use it. But if one falls out of your pocket, it's not the end of the world.
General Atomics' offering, simply called CCA right now, uses the same chassis as the XQ-67A, a test platform that's been flying for the Air Force Research Lab for some time.
It allowed GA to develop that more weapons-centric variant a lot faster than they would have if they had started from a clean sheet design.
Allison Turi is one of the aerospace engineers working on CCAs for the Air Force Research Lab. She was also a key contributor to an early design of the Fury when it was being developed by Blue Force Technologies before the company was acquired by Anduril.
The intent of this program was to develop a low-cost unmanned system that could act in a red threat scenario so that we can do pilot red air training at a lower cost point than we typically do right now.
Once the full capabilities of autonomously flown jet planes came into focus, the idea to take them from targeting training drones to full offensive weapons quickly became reality. Trenton White is the AFRL's program manager for the XQ-67A. He says part of the quick development surrounding CCAs as an overall concept was the willingness to share what he and his team learned in the lab with the companies tasked to build the things.
So it could consist of hardware, the structure, it could be electronics or subsystems that are shared across the different vehicle variants, and even software. And so with that as a starting point, that saves time and cost in developing new variants off of that architecture.
Another cost-saving CCAs bring with them the price to train new pilots.
You don't need to train and retain pilots because it's autonomous, so you can build as many of them as you need. You can fly them in great numbers against an advanced adversary, and you can start to do things that you couldn't do any other way.
So when can we expect to see CCAs taking to the skies? General Atomics says its version will start logging time in mid-2025.
All opinions expressed in this segment are solely the opinions of the contributors.
All right, folks, that's just going to about do it for us this week on Weapons in Warfare. Sure hope you enjoyed all the content that we were able to bring to you from National Harbor, Maryland, site of this year's AFA's Airspace and Cyber Conference. Now, we got way more content than we can fit into just one or two shows. So please be sure to like and subscribe to all of our social channels, and make sure you check out our website, san.com, for more. We have a lot of stuff coming your way over the next few weeks/months. But before we go, I want to spend a few minutes talking to you about the power to meet the moment. During his keynote address, General David Alvin discussed times when the Air Force had to make changes and essentially change how it operates. Historically, change happens after large events, like the attack on Pearl Harbor, the fall of the Berlin Wall, or the attacks on the World Trade Center and Pentagon. Those moments were so cataclysmic, the entire force structure of the Air Force was altered to meet the needs of the moment. Currently, the Air Force is undergoing another major restructuring, but this time there was no life-altering moment. This time, we more or less know what's coming, a conflict with China. Much like the Air and Space Forces are making the necessary changes now in order to meet the needs of the future, so too can we take a look at our lives, figure out the challenges, and then make the changes needed to meet the moment. Why wait for catastrophe when you have the power and ability to adapt while things are stable? We can't meet the moment if we aren't prepared for the moment. For senior producer Brett Baker, video editor Brian Spencer, and graphics artist Dakota Patillo, I'm Ryan Robertson with Straight Arrow News, signing off.